This is a placeholder. The attempt to fetch the chapter from the trash from htellab.com/inauto3352. The days of hanging out at Hogwarts /chapter the following error. Error. Attempt to load the address /wtrslab.com/a-reader/get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. An attempt to fetch the chapter from atr-lab.com/n-352. The days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 602. Failed with the following error. Attempt-tarb.com/api/get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. An attempt to fetch the chapter from htr-lab.com/enovel-5352. The days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 603. Failed with the following error. Error. Attempting to load the address lab.found/reader/get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. An attempt to fetch the chapter from htfetch/broadlab.com/novels/ The days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 604. Failed with the following error. Error. Attempt to load the address /update API-reader get failed due to a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. I couldn't retrieve the chapter from a wtr.com/novels. The days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 605. The attempt to load the address f-lab.com/884 failed with a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. Attempt to fetch the chapter from htfetch/novel-52. The days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 606. Failed with the following error. Error. Attempt to load h2tr-lab.com/8reader get failed due to a network error. Failed to fetch. Unable to retrieve the chapter from the provided URL. This is a placeholder. An attempt to fetch the chapter from wtr-bab.com/novel/5352. The days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 608. Failed with the following error. An attempt to load the address htip-wtr.com/ai-reader/get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. An attempt to fetch the chapter from hwtr-lab.com/n-5352. The days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 9. Failed with the following error. Error. Attempt to load htr.com/a-reader resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. Placeholder. Attempt to fetch the chapter from novel/53 Hogwarts, chapter 610. Failed. Error. Attempt to load URL/88/reader/get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. An attempt to fetch the chapter from htr-lab.com/enul. The days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 6111. Failed with the following error. Attempting to load o-lab.com/api/read resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. I tried to fetch the chapter from pavtab.com/ufo/352's The Days of Hanging Out at Hogwarts, chapter 612, but it failed with the following error. Attempt to load URL @tab.com's through API's reader get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. Chapter 613. The rain had been steady all morning, a soft, relentless curtain that blurred the castle's outer edges and turned the Black Lake to pewter. Inside, Hogwarts moved at its own slower weather. Candles guttered, tapestries whispered as if agreeing, and students clustered around fireplaces with steaming mugs and open textbooks. For those who preferred company to study, this was one of the best kinds of days, lazy, safe, and long. Marcus found the others in the unused common room off the 7th landing, the back staircase's heap of mismatched armchairs and a narrow window that looked out over the grounds. Hermione had her knees tucked under her, leafing through a battered book of runes. Ron was on the floor building a precarious tower of enchanted sugar cubes, and Lily, who'd been awake far too early despite the rain, was sketching faces, trees, an attempt at the gargoyle above the west clock. Marcus took his place on the faded sofa, letting the sound of rain and the murmur of classmates beyond the portrait door settle him. "You look like you're scheming," Ron said, flinging a cube across the room. It stuck to the tapestry and dripped sugar onto a stitched dragon, which glared in gummy humiliation. "No scheme," Marcus replied, "just thinking." Hermione glanced up, eyes bright in a way that made Marcus grateful she was always awake to the tiny shifts in people. "About the exam, we can finish our revisions later." "No, about Hogwarts." He rubbed the heel of his hand along his jaw. about how little changes when everything else does, how the castle keeps doing what it's always done. Lily tapped her pencil against the page. That's comforting. It is, Marcus agreed, until it isn't. They all heard the front door key before they saw the newcomer. An odd, rhythmic sound, 3 light taps, pause, 2 lighter ones, then the portrait swung inward. For a moment, Marcus thought it was another teacher or a late head boy, and then a rain-splattered figure stepped into the dim. "Is this an inn?" the newcomer asked, his voice bright with an accent none of them could immediately place. He peeled off a cloak that was stitched with small, embroidered suns and moons. His hair was the color of chestnut damp from the rain. Most noticeably, he carried under one arm a battered trunk plastered with stickers from around the world, and beneath that a small owl, wide-eyed and thoroughly disapproving. Hermione was the first to recover courtesy. "You've found the 7th landing common room," she offered. "Sit, dry off. What brings you here?" The man blinked at the small audience and smiled in a way that invited trust. "Name's Emrys Galen. I'm visiting. I heard Hogwarts is a good place to watch storms." Lily snorted. "We are a fine observatory. I promise excellent views and occasional lightning." Emrys laughed, then set his trunk on the floor with a soft impact. The owl hopped to the arm of the nearest chair and peered at Marcus, who felt inexplicably judged. As they made room, Marcus noticed the patch on Emrys's sleeve, a sun pierced by a wand, encircled with runes he didn't recognize. It had the faint shimmer of an emblem enchanted for weatherproofing. "Are you traveling with a caravan?" he asked idly. "Kind of," Emrys said, shrugging. "I trade weather charms and kitchen spells, mostly small things." He opened the trunk a crack and a warm domestic smell spilled out, cinnamon and iron, followed by the faint tinkling of glass. "And tonight, I was hoping to swap stories. I've got a map full of rain songs." Ron's interest, naturally, piqued at treasure. "Trade? For what? You should see the stuff in my dad's shop." "No, I mean stories," Emrys said, his gaze settling on Marcus. "I collect the way places remember storms. Hogwarts remembers differently. I wanted to listen." Hermione's hand went to her chin. It was a soft, instinctive gesture before the librarian in her took hold. "How do you mean?" she asked. Emrys sat, careful and deliberate, and told them about towns that turned their roofs into gutters of living glass to sing with each downpour, about an island community that drew lightning into their lanterns to power their kilns, and a monastery that painted prayers into the rain so it would fall in colors. His voice was low and even. Even when it described the strange, it made the strange feel ordinary and wondrous. When he spoke of the things he'd collected, runes like the one on his sleeve, little charms and stories folded into paper, the air felt different. The rain seemed closer to the window, like a curious animal scratching at the glass. Marcus realized that the heat from the fireplace pooled a little warmer, and the shadows around the portrait deepened in attention. "You collect the memories," Marcus said finally. "That's what I thought." Emrys nodded, smiling a little sadly. "Places remember more than we do. They hold on to echoes. Hogwarts keeps a careful ledger. Sometimes it lets me read a page." "Can you read one for us?" Lily asked before Marcus could think of how to answer. Her eyes shone like a candle flame held to a moth. Emrys's expression softened. He reached into his trunk and pulled out a small, folded square of fabric embroidered with a castle in silver thread. He laid it on the table with reverence, and the embroidery shivered like something waking up. "This is a memory of an evening," he said. "Not old, not ancient. The castle liked it enough to tuck it away. If you want to hear it, all you have to do is listen." They leaned in. Outside, the rain drummed a steady rhythm. Inside, Emrys began, and the embroidered castle breathed out a story that smelled of lemon drops and old parchment, of a stolen music box, and a night when laughter kept the owls from sleeping. It was small and intimate, an ordinary fragment, and it filled the room until the rain seemed less relentless, more like a companion tapping at the window, eager to hear the next line. When Emrys finished, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was a held breath. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a thread unwound that he hadn't known was taut. The castle had shared a secret with them, and in return they had offered something: company, time, a patient ear. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, plans and worries could wait. For a few hours, in a room that smelled of wet wool and cinnamon, Hogwarts kept them, as usual, safe and strange. And Marcus, who had been thinking about how little changed, realized the castle was changing them too, in small, certain ways, like trickles that widen into streams. "You'll stay a bit?" Hermione asked, voice gentle, practical. Emrys put a hand over the embroidered square, as if to keep the story warm. "If you'll have me. The rain's good company, but I prefer people." They had, and for the rest of the afternoon, under that quiet, listening spell, they told stories back. This is a placeholder. I attempted to fetch the chapter from http://la.convol before I've 3 the days of hanging out at Hogwarts chapters, but the request failed. Error. Attempt to load /reader get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. Attempt to fetch the chapter from http://days of hanging out at Hogwarts chapter 6 failed with the following error. Error. Attempt to load the address http://artlab.com/API-reader/get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. I couldn't retrieve the chapter from the provided URL. Please paste the chapter text here, and I will correct it into coherent, idiomatic English. This is a placeholder. An attempt to fetch the chapter from http://ad.com/en/novel/5/2/ the days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 16 failed with the following error. Error. Attempt to load address ad.com/readers get failed due to a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. Attempt to fetch the chapter from http://enovel5352 the days of hanging out at Hogwarts/chapter 618 failed with the following error. Error. Attempt to load the address at tape.com/API-reader get failed due to a network error. Failed to fetch. This is a placeholder. Attempt to fetch the chapter from wtr.lab.com/novel the days of hanging out at Hogwarts, chapter 6119 failed with the following error. Error. Attempt to load the arb.com/API-rei/get resulted in a network error. Failed to fetch. I couldn't retrieve the chapter from the provided URL. Please paste the chapter text here, and I will correct it into natural idiomatic English.